Welcome back. So the Israeli military says it has struck hundreds of Hamas and Islamic Jihad targets in the Gaza Strip overnight in a sent for 4 combat divisions south, where it continues to battle Hamas militants. The death toll from the fighting has tipped over the 1,000 mark. Well, for more on this conflict between Israel and Hamas, we speak to Saleh Hijazi, who is apartheid-free policy coordinator for the Palestinian BDS National Committee. He's joining us from the city of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank of the Palestinian territories. Saleh, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we certainly have seen the images of what is going on between Palestine and Israel over the weekend. Very, very concerning, frightening images, if anything, to best describe it. I mean, explain to us just the atmosphere of where you are.
Good morning, Naledi. The occupied Palestinian territories, which includes Gaza, is a similar story. Gaza is a very particular place, but we share the same context. And the context is a story that South Africans know all too well. It is of white settlers coming onto the land, taking it away and imposing a system of oppression and domination that kills and dispossesses and deprives. That is a system of apartheid. And this system of apartheid has been acknowledged by both South African, the architects of South Africa's apartheid, the white settlers, as well as those who stood and advocated and took action against it, such as, for example, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who, when he was here in the West Bank where I live, said that what I've seen is much more worse than what I've experienced. And most recently, his church has announced Israel as an apartheid state. So this is the context. Now, coming to Gaza, the images that we've seen that are coming out of Gaza that you're referring to just now is unfortunately being repeated year after year after year. This is a small enclave, one of the most densely populated areas in the world. It is segregated by walls and military structures. It's under a military blockade that controls every single thing that comes in and out of there, preventing people from leaving, preventing, for example, kids and children's milk from coming into it. Israel controls electricity, water that it has just got from this deprived population. It is, you know, in perhaps South African terms, very akin to a Bantustan. And the living conditions there is very akin to a township. And this has been maintained for decades, most severely in the last 17 years. And since 2008, Israel has started these military operations against the Gaza Strip, bombing from air, residential building, infrastructure, people in their own homes. I mean, we're receiving news of entire families being bombed while they're in their homes yesterday, and this is a pattern that keeps on repeating time and time and time again. This must end, and to end, the world, and particularly South Africa, I think, needs to acknowledge the situation for what it is. It is a situation of apartheid. This is a crime against humanity. This has been documented by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, these renowned human rights organizations, as well as human rights experts at the United Nations, the Human Rights Council, and there are various states who are addressing Israel as an apartheid state, including actually the Foreign Minister of South Africa, Dirk's Minister Naledi Pandor, who just earlier this year called on the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants against Israel's apartheid. And here I'm quoting the minister, to issue arrest warrants against Israel's apartheid leaders. The reason why we're here is because of the complicity of the world in the system of apartheid. Shielding it from accountability, this is one form of complicity, but other more direct forms of complicity is the directly supporting, including by, for example, arming Israel, like the US is doing right now, in maintaining this system of apartheid and colonial oppression against the Palestinians.
Yeah, I think
This is the time to see real change. Please.
Yeah, I think, Saleh, we certainly will get to, the role that was been played by the international community. It really is a big part of the discussion, but I want to sit a little bit with what actually is happening within the conflict. I mean, there's a sense that this attack by Hamas is quite meticulously planned. I mean, let's talk about who the key role players really are, and what we're hearing from the Palestinian side.
Look, again, I mean, if you can tell it in the story, imagine a prison where people inside of there have been imprisoned unjustly for a very prolonged period of time. And every now and then you come and pound them in this prison. Do you expect that those who are oppressed, and again, here speaking to South Africans, would want to resist, to revolt against these unjust conditions? And this is exactly what happened. Palestinians, and this is what should not be a surprise, planned or not planned, revolt against unjust conditions. They have the right to be free, and they have the right to seek that freedom. And this is exactly what we're doing here, whether in the Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in other areas of colonized Palestine. We long for freedom, and we're going to seek that freedom. We're not going to accept the oppressive conditions that are imposed on us by an apartheid regime. On the other hand, what you have is one of the most developed, well-armed countries in the world that are supported by the major powers like the United States and the European countries. It is supposedly, which has now been uncovered as a lie, one of the most sophisticated surveillance and intelligence countries in the world. This is our oppressor. Our oppressor is a strong, a very militarized a regime that is supported by the strongest and most powerful countries in the world, that is imposing a system of apartheid and colonial oppression on us, and us, whether Palestinians in Gaza or the West Bank, have the right to revolt against this system of oppression, and will do so. The violence, the root of violence is oppression. It starts with oppression, and the reaction by the oppressed is only because the violence of the oppression is what we start with. And this is where the story must start, always. It is the source of oppression, and here the source of oppression, and the story is, again, just to say, it should be known way too well for South Africans, because it actually started along the same time in 1948, when a system of apartheid was established in South Africa. A system of apartheid was also established on Palestine by colonial settlers. While the one in South Africa has ended, unfortunately, the one in Palestine is still thriving because of the complicity of the world and the support of the world to the system of apartheid. Palestinians under the system of apartheid will definitely revolt against it.
Yeah, Saleh, I mean, you keep talking about South Africa, and I think it's an important point for us to sit on a little bit. What is it that you'd like to be hearing from South Africa at this time?
Well, first, we'd like to see South Africa deal with apartheid Israel the same way it would have liked the world to deal with the apartheid regime that was in South Africa. Cut all diplomatic, trade, economic, cultural, academic relations with apartheid. Apartheid has no place in the world, and South Africa should take a leading role in ensuring that that doesn't happen. Cut all ties, boycott Israel, divest from Israel. This is one. Two, there are South Africans, in contravention to South African law, that are serving in the Israeli army, that are carrying these atrocities and crimes against humanity, including apartheid against the Palestinian people. This should end, and South African legal bodies, the prosecutor, the jurists should look into this and see how they can prosecute and end the participation of South Africans in the Israeli army and the commission and their participation in the commission of crimes, including crimes against humanity. This is two. Three, we'd like South Africa to take a leading role in very similar to how the world acted at the time of apartheid in South Africa, to take a leading role in establishing, reviving the Special Committee Against Apartheid at the United Nations. Yeah. The UN General Assembly is currently, ongoing, and there's an opportunity to do that right now. Yeah.
Okay, and let's talk a little bit about that then, because you've got the United Nations Security Council meeting on the matters. What do you want to hear from the UN particularly?
Well, we would like the UN to take on its responsibility. It posed the question of Palestine 75 years ago, and until now, it has not addressed the question of Palestine the way it should be addressed, through looking at it as justice. We'd like the Special Committee Against Apartheid, which was established at the time of apartheid in South Africa, and had it worked, along, of course, with the popular mobilization, the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement in South Africa, to end apartheid in South Africa. We would like the revival of the Special Committee Against Apartheid by the UN General Assembly, which is meeting right now. We want to see accountability for Israel. Yeah. We want the UN to say that no one is above international law, because right now the hypocrisy is stark. The hypocrisy is unbelievable, that while the global powers talk about international law when it comes to Ukraine and other conflicts, they put Israel above international law. This should not stand. And countries like South Africa and others in the global south should not allow it to stand.
Yeah, well, we know that BDS has been in South Africa campaigning for support of the Palestinian side in this tension, and for many, many years. There's, of course, the question around whether or not you are concerned about Palestine's side really having the resources to sustain this military violence that we are seeing. And I'm talking about the military resources to keep this going as lives are being shed in the meantime.
Look, BDS is a non-violent movement, and it calls for respect of international law. And our comrades and colleagues in South Africa are doing the same. We call for we carry out campaigns to boycott Israel and Israeli academic institutions, cultural institutions. We call for the divestment of companies from Israel and from the crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people. And what we would like to see ultimately is for sanctions to be imposed on a regime that is illegal and continues to carry out crimes against humanity. We do this non-violently, and this is a heritage of the Palestinian people for more than 100 years. We've been struggling against colonialism, settler colonialism, and apartheid, and a major part of this resistance is nonviolent. Actually, the biggest part of our resistance is nonviolent. So BDS comes as a result of the heritage of Palestinian nonviolent resistance against the settler colonialism and apartheid. And then we have those around the world, the global movement, including in South Africa, who are standing in solidarity and doing the same thing. Yeah. But our ultimate goal is very simple. Respect international law. Apply international law equally on all, and especially Israel and those regimes that carry out apartheid and settler colonialism like Israel against our people.
Yeah, Saleh, one last question. Of course, the Israeli Prime Minister has said residents of Gaza should leave their residences due to attacks that Israel is planning. I mean, where do these families go?
Exactly. This is a blockaded, you know, a Bantustan, again, kind of akin to a Bantustan that is closed off, that Israel has closed off militarily and has been continuously bombing over the years. This is what Israel wants to see when it comes to the land of Palestine, is a land without the indigenous Palestinian people on it. They carry out these policies in different ways. In Gaza, it is by these military strikes from air and from the tanks. In the West Bank, it's through military attacks, it's through settler violence, through the cutting of water. For example, just yesterday, for a whole week, my house did not have water. Just last night, Israel, you know, opened the tap basically for the Palestinian territories, and I was able to receive water where we were able to bring tanks. You know, this is another method of trying to dispossess Palestinians and push them away, forcibly displace Palestinians from their lands. And the same goes for Gaza, but it's just much more violent. It's through airstrikes. Look, this is the policy. This is what the Zionist entity, the apartheid regime, wants to see, is a land without the Palestinians. It's a full control for the Jewish Israelis, for the Zionist regime over this land. The calls on Gaza are very, and should be very alarming to everyone. There are calls from members of Israeli parliament and leaders for genocide there. A member of the Israeli parliament has been calling for a Nakba. Let's do a Nakba is the term that Palestinians use for the ethnic cleansing and the murder and the massacres that took place in 1948 when Israel was established, where more than 800,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced and became refugees. These are half of the Palestinian population right now living outside of colonized Palestine. We're seeing calls for another Nakba on Gaza. There are calls for genocide. This is very, very alarming, but it speaks to the intention of the Zionist apartheid regime.
I mean, at this point, we understand that hundreds have been killed. This is the reality of the situation, and I think the world watches in shock and horror as we see this violence continue between Palestine and Israel. I mean, of the numbers that we have tallied, let's be bluntly honest here. How many of those are children? How many of those are vulnerable women and children?
Many, and unfortunately it did not start the day before yesterday. It started way before. The UN earlier this year has come out to say that 2023 has been the bloodiest year in the occupied West Bank, for example, where I live, since 2 decades. 40 children have been killed by Israeli forces and Israeli settlers, most of the time by snipers, and very well-armed Israeli soldiers firing at these children when they're on the streets, when they're raiding their communities and refugee camps and the homes. It didn't start 2 days ago. The killing by apartheid Israel has been non-stop over the last few months and the last few years, and you go on and go on. In Israel, as I said, the story, when you're looking at what happens now, you should take into context the 17-year-old's criminal blockade, the military attacks in 2008, in 2009, 2012, 2014, 2015, and go on. You know, this is on repeat, and the reason why it's on repeat is because there is complicity by the international community. It allows this to happen. It allows Israel to be above international law.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult conversation to have, and the world is, of course, watching this one. But thank you so much for giving us your time, Saleh. We really do appreciate it. Saleh Hijazi, Apartheid-Free Policy Coordinator for Palestinian BDS National Committee. This is, of course, on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. He's joining us from the city of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank of the Palestinian territories. So the Israeli military says it has struck hundreds of Hamas and Islamic Jihad targets in the Gaza Strip overnight and has sent four combat divisions south, where it continues to battle Hamas militants. The death toll from the fighting has tipped over the 1,000 mark. For more on the conflict between Palestine and Israel, we're joined on Teams by Rowan Polovin, who's the national chairperson of the South African Zionist Federation. Rowan, a good morning to you. I mean, initial thoughts on just the images that we're seeing coming out between Israel and Palestine over the past few days.
Good morning, Aledi. 700 innocent Israelis were massacred over the past few days. This includes women and children. People were torn from their homes. 240 young people were massacred while at a music festival. Over 100 hostages were taken by the terrorist organization Hamas from Israel into Gaza. 3,000 rockets were fired in Israeli civilian areas. This is an absolutely devastating situation, a massacre of Jews in the streets, and Israel has a right to defend herself and to protect her civilians in this situation.
Is it fair to say that Israel was caught off guard?
Well, I think this was during Shabbat. This was attacked by Hamas deliberately on the high holy Jewish day of Simchat Torah. It was deliberately timed to target Jews when they were resting, when they were celebrating. It is an absolutely heinous and evil time to target Jews, and it is obviously something that must be condemned in the strongest terms.
You know, I obviously just spoke to BDS just moments before I spoke to you, and in that conversation, a lot of what they do is use the word apartheid, and when they call for South Africa's support for the Palestinian side in this conflict. I mean, what do you say to that view that BDS says, well, they've seen apartheid for decades at the hands of Israel. What is your response to that?
Well, first of all, there is a blatantly lie, a blatant mischaracterization. Israel is a multicultural democracy. But whatever your views are on Israel, whatever your political position is, I'm absolutely shocked that BDS justifies the callous murder of innocents. Does anything justify dragging grandmothers by their hair on the streets? Does any ideology justify beheading women and children? Any kind of justification for this is atrocious and outrageous in any possible matter.
Yeah, explain to us what I suppose the situation looks like inside Israel at the moment, and I'm talking about, from an atmosphere point of view, where, of course, we're getting reports that the Israeli Prime Minister has called for those in Gaza to move away from their residences. So I imagine the situation there where people have been told to vacate their homes. What does it look like inside Israel?
Well, people are living in terror in Israel. People are fearful, but Israelis are also extremely resilient. Israelis are coming together. There's been incredible unity in the country. There has been incredible humanitarian efforts, blood drives, anything possible to help victims, help innocent people, try and recover these people who have been abducted. So the atmosphere is incredibly tense. People are extremely upset, but people are remarkably resilient.
Ultimately, though, we are seeing innocent lives lost on both sides. And that is why the world watches in terror. You've got innocent people losing their lives, over 1,000 people losing their lives in the past few days alone. What's the possibility of a truce, where leaders can sit down and find a solution? Or at the very least, what is it that you want to hear from the United Nations that says, well, let's bring some calm to the situation?
Well, Naledi, Hamas has committed numerous war crimes. They have attacked civilians. They have seized hostages. These are not acts of legitimate military targets. These are targeting innocent civilians. On the other hand, Israel does everything she can to protect ordinary civilians. While Hamas tries to maximize civilian Israeli deaths, Israel goes out of its way to minimize Palestinian civilians. As you said earlier, Israel has been sending very clear warnings to Gaza residents in advance of airstrikes. Israel does everything it can within the ambit of international law. And it is one thing to call for a ceasefire and to call for both sides to be calm. But what needs to happen is that Israel needs to be able to defend herself, to protect her citizens, to stamp out terror, and to ensure that calm remains such that Jews can live in peace with their neighbors in the Middle East. There is, in fact, an incredible momentum we're seeing at the moment, where the Middle East is coming to peace with Israel. We're seeing this remarkable momentum where there's now normalization talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And clearly Hamas and other actors in the region are extremely upset about the idea of Jews living in peace, Jews living in the ancient homeland of Israel. So until the world can come to terms with Israel as the world's only Jewish state, until Hamas and the Palestinians can come to terms of living in peace with Israel, the situation, unfortunately, will continue. We certainly do call for peace.
Is there space for aid to be brought in? I'm talking about international aid for the most vulnerable.
Certainly, and there have been significant humanitarian aid efforts that have already begun from all over the world, from the United States, from other countries, and certainly Israel is doing everything it can to minimize any kind of humanitarian crisis in Gaza and to allow any kind of humanitarian goods to pass through, and hopefully the calm situation will be restored at some point.
I asked the representative of BDS just moments ago, certainly what the international community needs to be saying, but what is it that you want to hear from the South African community? Because ultimately South Africa, as it has even in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, been doing quite a bit of a balancing act. I mean, what is it that South Africa says in this matter?
We've been extremely concerned by the Department of International Relations, the callous statements, the callous and cold-hearted commentary. Instead of calling for Israel to have a right to exist, to have a right to defend herself, to have a right to stand our terror, what we've seen from the South African government is in fact some kind of bizarre justification for the actions. That is something that needs to be condemned in the strongest terms. I was very heartened to see countries in Africa like Kenya who have been extremely supportive. Other countries in Africa have been extremely supportive of Israel. And we expect the South African government to protect democratic values, to support Israel's democracy, to support Israel's right to live in peace, to live as a Jewish state. And we actually call on the South African government to play a role, to have a mediatory role to play in bringing about peace, not to stoke the flames, not to take the wrong side in this conflict.
I want to bring this in because, you know, we've been so concerned with the conflict in the Ukraine as the globe, right? And now attention coming right back to Israel and Palestine. Is there a concern that we are seeing global conflicts continuing, in that, you know, we're actually seeing a global multipolarization and serious tension continuing to brew across the globe? I mean, it's terrifying, to be very honest with you, when you start to think about whether or not this is going to lead to, you know, the possibility of a war, a global war.
I completely agree with you, Naledi. It is incredibly concerning to see totalitarian states who...
Yeah. What happens to those countries that have been warming up to Israel, the likes of Morocco? What now for them?
Well, we are still seeing remarkable support in the Middle East and Africa for Israel. That will certainly continue. These countries have offered to assist Israel, countries like Turkey, Morocco, certainly many countries in Africa, and other countries around the world. And hopefully that will continue. These countries have an interest in peace. These countries want to see peace in Israel. They want to see a peaceful continent, and hopefully that will continue. But they do need to condemn terrorism. They do need to encourage democracy. They do need to encourage the protection of human rights. And hopefully we'll be seeing that at some point in the future.
For South Africans that are watching this, and of course, here's the thing, is that we're also broadcasting to much of the continent at the moment. So many of us are watching at the moment and wondering, if you do have family in Israel or Palestine, what do we communicate to our family members? And firstly, can we even reach them?
Well, certainly the Zionist Federation South Africa has been around the clock doing everything we possibly can to help South Africans in Israel at the moment, whether they are traveling or on programs there, to either be safe or to return to South Africa. Many people in the Jewish community have family and friends in Israel. All of us know someone who has unfortunately been killed. It's a terrible situation. We are trying very hard to work through DIRCO. We are also doing our own efforts. We hope that the South African Embassy in Israel will be doing its efforts to assist. And we are just doing everything we can to make sure that people are safe, that people are protected, and if they want to come back to South Africa, there is an easy way to do that.
What are you hearing from DIRCO? You say you've been reaching out to them. What is the conversation looking like with DIRCO? Because ultimately you've got Minister Naledi Pandor, who has got a lot of pressure on her at this point to say something. What is your communication with DIRCO at this stage as the South African Zionist Federation?
Well, we're extremely concerned about DIRCO's position, as I said earlier. We're extremely concerned that DIRCO seems to be taking sides, and in fact taking the sides of the totalitarian terrorist regime of Hamas in Gaza. We call on DIRCO to be even-handed, to have a role to play, as I said earlier, as a mediator, not to stoke the flames. On a practical level, we're hoping that DIRCO will play a role in terms of the South African Embassy in Israel. So far, they have not been overly helpful, and we have been doing our own work, but I'm sure that now it's Monday, we will certainly be getting more practical assistance out of the South African Embassy in Israel. But we certainly hope that South Africa stops its callous, hatred of Israel. This is what we continuously see by the government. But I am certainly pleased to tell you that the majority of South Africans support Israel. The majority of South Africans want peace. The majority of South Africans are praying for peace. And that is the side we all need to stand with. We need to stand for peace and for solidarity and for a movement that does not stem from hate and terror.
I think what we can't argue is the globe is praying for peace in this matter. I mean, that's what everybody wants. Where you've got over 1,000 lives lost in just a matter of days. But I need to bring this in. Water and electricity supply having been cut off to ordinary citizens in Gaza. I mean, there's of course the question whether or not the actions of Hamas need to be paid for by ordinary citizens in Gaza. What do you say to that?
Well, Naledi, who's to blame for the situation? Who's to blame when Hamas fires rockets from civilian areas in Gaza? It is a war crime to fire civilian rockets from a civilian area to another civilian area in Israel. When Hamas hides in civilian infrastructure, uses civilian buildings for its operations, what do they honestly expect? We are extremely sympathetic to ordinary citizens in Gaza, ordinary Palestinians who want to get about their day and unfortunately have this totalitarian dictatorship running their lives. Well, Hamas is 100% responsible for any actions that happen. They're 100% to blame, and that is the beginning and end of it. Israel will do everything it can to minimize the loss of Palestinian casualties. A death of an innocent Palestinian is tragic. It's absolutely clear that it's tragic. And Hamas is ultimately responsible for the situation, and Hamas is responsible for bringing down the temperature and calming the situation as well.
Yeah, what's next for the South African Zionist Federation? What work are you doing back home, aside from, of course, continuing to engage DIRCO? I ask this because BDS is continuing to ask for South Africa to boycott any business and trade relations with Israel. So what is on your checklist of to do as the South African Zionist Federation?
Well, it's unfortunate that BDS, which is an anti-Semitic international organization that targets Jews and is obsessed about the one and only Jewish state, it's unfortunate that BDS does not focus on issues of South African relevance, like water and electricity, like helping ordinary South Africans get on with their lives. That is certainly what we're doing. We're promoting Israeli solutions to South African problems. We're promoting trade and international relations. We're promoting peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. This is what we're doing. We're doing remarkable work to ensure that ordinary South Africans are connected, that we are a multicultural society, a rainbow nation. That is what we need to look for. We need to look for love. We do not need to look for hate. And I strongly condemn these outrageous acts of BDS, which appear to be justifying the current conflict.
Yeah.
That is extremely unfortunate. We are an organization of love and peace and coexistence.
All right, Rowan, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and what is honestly a very difficult discussion. Rowan Polovin is National Chairperson of the South African Zionist Federation, speaking to us there, where we've seen over 1,000 lives lost in just a matter of days. But we'll keep you updated on that story as it continues.